Right after the Soviet defensive effort in the Battle of Kursk, the Red Army launched the Belgorod-Kharkov offensive operation, a strategic offensive that aimed to recapture Belgorod and Kharkov, and destroy German forces of the region. The operation began in the early hours of August 3, 1943. By August 23, the troops of the Voronezh and Steppe fronts had recaptured Kharkov. The operation led to the retreat of the German forces in Ukraine behind the Dnieper River. In September 1943, the German Army Group South under the leadership of General Erich von Manstein withdrew to the west bank of the Dnieper in an operation that for the most part was well ordered, but at times degenerated into a disorganized rout as the exhausted German soldiers became unglued. On January 4, 1944, Manstein met with Hitler to tell him that the Dnieper line was untenable and that he needed to retreat in order to save his forces. Hitler refused, and Manstein again requested changes in the highest levels of the military leadership, but was turned down, as Hitler believed that he alone was capable of managing the wider strategy. In January, Manstein was forced to retreat further west by the Soviet offensive. The Soviet attack started on January 24 when Konyev's Second Ukrainian Front attacked the salient from the southeast. A breakthrough was quickly achieved, and the penetration was exploited by the 5th Guards Tank Army the following day. Despite the awareness of the German staff that an attack was imminent, they were surprised by the appearance of the 1st Ukrainian Front's newly formed 6th Tank Army. The 6th Tank Army, with 160 tanks and 50 self-propelled guns, was inexperienced and took longer than expected to penetrate the western flank of the salient. Over the next 3 days, the two tank armies formed a thinly manned outer ring around what was now the Korsun pocket, while another, inner, ring was formed by the Soviet 27th, 52nd, and 4th Guard armies. The Soviet commanders were optimistic about the progress of the operation. Stalin was promised a second Stalingrad, and he expected it. Konyev wired, "There is no need to worry, Comrade Stalin. The encircled enemy will not escape." Inside the pocket were nearly 60,000 men from 6 German divisions, at about 55% of their authorized strength, along with a number of smaller combat units. Among the trapped German forces were the 5th SS Panzer Division Viking, with several thousand Russian auxiliaries. This division had some 11,400 personnel, 30 operational tanks and assault guns. Manstein moved quickly, and by early February the 3rd and 48th Panzer Corps were assembled for a relief effort. Hitler intervened, however, and ordered the attack be transformed into an effort to counter-encircle the two Soviet army groups. General Hermann Braith, commander of the 3rd Panzer Corps, requested the relief formations be united to attempt to force a corridor to the encircled German units. This request was refused, and the counter-encirclement of the Soviet forces was attempted. The attack by the 48th Panzer Corps on the southeastern flank of the pocket quickly stalled, as it had only 27 tanks and 34 assault guns operational. The 3rd Panzer Corps' attempt continued until February 8, when it became undeniable that the effort had failed. Manstein ordered the Corps to instead drive directly to the relief of the German forces inside. The 3rd Panzer Corps was pulled back and reorganized for a new attack 15 kilometers south of Boyarka. On February 11, Braith began a push with the 16th and 17th Panzer Divisions driving toward the Niloy-Tikich River. They initially made good progress. The 1st Panzer Division and 1st SS Panzer Division covered the northern flank of the drive. As they drove deeper into the Soviet positions, General Vatutin was ordered to assemble for Tank Corps with the goal of cutting off the attacking German spearhead. The weather warmed, turning the roads to a soft mud and bogging down German progress. On February 11, the 3rd Panzer Corps reached the Niloy-Tikich River and established a small bridgehead on the eastern bank. But it was unable to advance further, meaning that the German forces in the pocket had to fight their way out. It is important to state that even in a desperate situation like this, very few German soldiers and no Waffen-SS men in the cauldron had surrendered. General Wilhelm Stemmermann, the commander of the 9th Corps, who was placed in command of the forces in the pocket, began withdrawing his troops from the north side of the pocket, reorienting the thrust of the escape direction, and attacking south to move toward the relief forces on the north bank of the Niloi Tikich. The encircled forces aimed to capture the villages of Nova Buda, Komarovka, Kilki and Shandarovka at the southwestern perimeter of the pocket to reach a favorable jump-off line for the breakout. Of all the German divisions in the pocket, the 5th SS Panzer Division contributed the most to continued operations. Since the SS Division Viking was the only truly mobile force inside the pocket, the division's tracked units were repeatedly shifted from one end of the pocket to the other to shore up crumbling lines. The pocket had wandered south and halfway toward the relief force and rested on the village of Shandarovka. The settlement was heavily defended by the Soviets. By nightfall on February 16, the 3 Panzer Corps fought its way closer to the encircled formations, with spearheads now 7 kilometers from the encircled forces. In the 7 kilometers that separated Group Stemmermann and the 3rd Panzer Corps, Konev was positioning his forces for an attack slated for February 17. His 3 armies surrounded the encircled German forces. Stemmermann elected to stay behind with a rearguard of 6,500 men, the remaining combined strength of the 57th and 88th German infantry divisions. The pocket was at this point just 5 kilometers in diameter, with no room to maneuver. Shandarovka, once seen as a viable escape route, became known as Hell's Gate. The Red Army subjected the area to intense artillery and rocket fire, while the Red Air Force ground attack aircraft bombed and strafed the encircled troops, only infrequently challenged by the Luftwaffe. Various unit diaries described a scene of gloom, with fires caused by Soviet night bombing with incendiaries, destroyed or abandoned vehicles everywhere and wounded men and disorganized units on muddy roads. On February 16, 1944, Manstein, without waiting for a decision by Hitler, sent a radio message to Stemmermann to authorize the breakout. His message was short and clear. Password freedom, objective Lysyanka, 11 p.m. With extreme reluctance, Stemmermann and Leap decided to leave 1,450 wounded at Shandarovka, attended by doctors and orderlies. The troops then began to assemble at dusk into 3 assault columns. General Konev, now aware of the German breakout, resolved to keep his promise to Stalin not to let the German forces escape. Soviet intelligence, however, at this stage vastly overestimated the armored strength of the 3rd Panzer Corps, and Konev therefore proceeded in force. He ordered all available armor and artillery to attack the escaping units, cut them into isolated groups and then destroy them piecemeal. The 2 blocking Soviet rifle divisions, the 206th Rifle and 5th Guards Airborne, had been smashed by the German assault forces. Without infantry support, Soviet tanks then fired into the German formations from a distance. With no anti-tank weapons in the field, T-34s commenced to wade into support troops, headquarters units, stragglers and Red Cross identified medical columns. Under the yellow sky of early morning and over ground covered with wet snow, Soviet tanks made straight for the thick of the column, plowing up and down, killing and crushing with their tracks. The killing in this human hunt went on for several hours. By midday, the majority of the now intermingled divisions had reached the Niloi Tikich stream, 15 meters wide and 2 meters deep due to melting snow. Despite the fact that the 1st Panzer Division had captured a bridge and engineers had erected another, the panicking men saw the river as their only escape. Since the main body was away and south of the bridgeheads, trees were felled to form makeshift bridges and the troops floundered across, with hundreds of men drowning, being swept downstream with horses and military debris. Many others succumbed to shock or hypothermia. Toward the end phase of the breakout, engineers had built several bridges and rear guard units of the 57th and 88th Infantry Divisions crossed the river dry, including 20 horse-drawn wagons with about 600 wounded. Stemmermann was awarded the Knight's Cross with oak leaves for his leadership of the troops inside the Korsun pocket right up until the moment of the final breakout. Until that point he had done a masterful job of holding the pocket and advancing in the direction of the relief forces, before being killed at the last moment when a Soviet anti-tank gun knocked out his staff car. The Red Army encirclement of Cherkasy, Korsun inflicted serious damage on 6 German divisions. Though most of the trapped men escaped, they had to leave nearly all of their heavy equipment behind. The 72nd and Viking divisions were completely intermingled. No longer did they have any tanks, artillery, vehicles, or rations. Many soldiers were entirely without weapons, quite a few even without footgear. Neither division could be considered in any way able to fight. Hitler's insistence on holding the exposed salient strongly limited the options of German field commanders. Ultimately, the encircling forces were unable to prevent a German breakout, allowing a significant portion of the trapped Germans to escape. Given the initial circumstances of the battle, the degree of Soviet losses makes it clear that while the Soviets won at Korsun, it was a victory that came at a high price. Because of Hitler's directive that all positions were to be defended to the last man, Manstein's permission to break out was not well received by Hitler. Manstein flew to Hitler's headquarters to try to convince him to change his mind. Hitler eventually relented, but relieved Manstein of his command on March 30, 1944. Manstein appeared on the cover of the January 10, 1944 issue of Time magazine, above the caption, "Retreat may be masterly, but victory is in the opposite direction." I hope you enjoyed this episode, and to make sure you don't miss my future work, please make sure you are subscribed to my channel and press the bell notification button. Thank you, and see you in the next video.